Let's very briefly look at the evolution of the human diet. A popular movement related to nutrition is the paleo diet, which also goes by names such as primal, stone age, or caveman diet. Whatever the name and specifics of each variation, the underlying philosophy is that we humans evolved to eat a certain way, a way that is very different to how the majority of us eat these days. Critics correctly point out that eating exactly like our pre-agricultural ancestors is impossible, and even if it were possible, may still not be optimal for health, especially in the context of our modern lifestyle. That said, it makes a lot of sense to look to our ancestors to help determine what our bodies might be best adapted to eating. After all, our hunter-gatherer ancestors were a very physically capable bunch, as you can see in this clip showing Marseille, modern-day hunter-gatherers, holding a jumping contest. There are two ways we can get an insight into what our ancestors ate. Archaeology, basically digging up bones and teeth and occasionally a frozen or otherwise well-preserved body, and using some advanced analysis techniques to make some educated guesses as to the person's diet, which, while very impressive, requires a lot of assumptions that may or may not be true. The other method involves visiting and perhaps even living with communities that have maintained a pre-agricultural hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Examples include the Maasai that you just saw in the video clip, as well as the Inuit, the Hadza of Tanzania, and the Kitavans of Papua New Guinea, the Hui of northern South America, and the Gung of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa. We have some reasonable data on these peoples, who span North and South America, Central and Southern Africa, and the South Pacific. Only the diets of 4 of them are shown here. And these 4 are actually very different. The Inuit and Hui have diets very high in animal food, with the Hadza coming in third. The Gung, on the other hand, rely heavily on nuts and seeds, as well as eating the most vegetables of any of these 4. And despite these very stark differences in diet, none of these groups, when consuming their traditional diet and living more or less their traditional lifestyle, have much of what we tend to think of as diet-related health conditions or lifestyle conditions. For example, they have very low rates of cardiovascular disease and cancer. One plausible explanation for this is that all these diets are devoid of highly processed foods. Another is that the food is free from herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and antibiotics. And in reality, it's likely to be related to a whole host of lifestyle factors, like sleep, the stress of the lifestyle or lack of the stress or the type of stress, and the very high level of social connectivity enjoyed by all these groups that basically live a tribal lifestyle. It may also be other factors such as some reduction in pollution, although a lot of pollution these days is global, so we can't put it down exclusively to that. The key message is that many highly varied traditional diets can be compatible with healthy longevity, whereas a variety of highly processed modern diets, or diets that contain a large proportion of highly processed foods, do not appear to be compatible with health in the long term. These peoples represent what our more distant ancestors probably ate, or ate like. Well, what about somewhat more recent ancestors? Well, the arrival of agriculture and the cultivation of food plants, as well as livestock, profoundly changed the way we ate and lived, or rather our ancestors ate and lived. And that's probably started with subsistence farming, where small groups grew enough to feed themselves with perhaps a little left over for trade in the better seasons. This meant a shift in dietary staples and the nature of physical activity. And of course, those who adopted an agricultural lifestyle could not be very nomadic, whereas previously probably many of our ancestors were. It probably also reduced the variety of what we ate and provided a more certain day-to-day supply of food, but a less certain season-to-season supply of food, depending on what the climate was like and how much crop yield there was each year. Perhaps the biggest change was that the efforts of the relatively few could feed the many, and this freed up others to specialize, for example, to become full-time tool makers. And of course, in modern days, we have all kinds of specialties. Now, of course, we have intensive farming, which, although highly efficient, has led to a diet that would be largely unrecognizable to those from, say, the 1800s, let alone to our pre-agricultural ancestors. It has, of course, further freed us up, or most of us at least, to do things completely unrelated to food production. We can simply go into the supermarket and get what we need food-wise. But the quality and variety of food we eat has almost certainly suffered. You might question my claim around variety, given the thousands of products available at most supermarkets. But consider that so many of these are slightly different combinations of the same narrow number of grains, various sources of sugar, and a handful of other ingredients. So really, from an ingredient perspective, it's the same stuff wrapped up in a slightly different form. Not fundamentally different food sources, such as having a different vegetable or a different fruit or a different meat. Now, if you're interested in research looking at hunter-gatherer diets, the evolution of the human diet from pre to post-agricultural times, or the evidence suggesting that highly processed food is strongly linked to the rise in cardiovascular disease and other conditions associated with lifestyle, then check out one or more of these references here. They're all available either directly online or via the AUT library. And this is just for your interest. None of these are requirements of the paper for you to read.